Hello everyone, welcome to Desker's YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to talk about how do you break down a large project or a feature or a problem that you want to solve into smaller chunks that can then be consumed by the engineering team. Now, as a product manager, you are responsible for strategic work as well as tactical. Strategic work involves defining the product strategy and the vision for the company. Tactical work is everything else that goes into converting that vision into reality. So let's talk about it a little bit. So you've identified the customer problem that needs to be solved. You've considered the different priorities and you've decided, okay, this is a particular problem you want to solve and you need to build an XYZ feature to solve this problem. Now the next step is for you to go and explain this problem to the team, find a way to solve it, and then translate that solution into a feature that can be developed by the engineering team. In smaller teams, the product managers are responsible for the end-to-end process, which is starting from the discovery, defining problems, up to the execution. In larger teams, you might have some product managers who are more focused towards the discovery aspect, and others are the product owners or delivery managers who then take that problem and work with the engineering team. So in either case, it is important for you to have an understanding of how the process works. A good part of this video will spend on discussing why is it actually important to break down a large project or a feature or a problem into smaller bits, because lots of times teams don't seem to agree on the importance of this aspect of product development. And when they don't agree and believe in it, what ends up happening is you end up building user stories that aren't necessarily user stories. So we'll talk more about that later. But why is it important is because the devil's is in the details. You can't tell your team to build something without defining how it should behave. Otherwise, they will end up building it in the way they understand and not how it needs to work. I've actually seen this happen over and over again. You go about building what seems to be a small feature without really defining it, without putting the thought or time or effort into it. And then as the team starts building it out without requirements, they realize, oh my God, this is actually not a small feature, it's a big feature. So it's important to break down the project into smaller chunks in order to actually estimate it as well. So it's better to realize this before as a product manager versus sitting in a grooming meeting with the development team. So let's look at a hypothetical example to explain the importance of this further. Your company has a blog page, the marketing team believe that the engagement of the blog is low. They've looked at the numbers and they think there is room for improvement. And they have a hypothesis, which is if people interact more on the blog page, it will lead to increase in traffic. Now the team believes that there are different types of solutions that can do it, and their final conclusion is that if you could add the ability to comment on the blog, then that would mean the engagement would increase. Now the team comes to you and say, hey, now this is what we want to build, so can you help us? So now we're assuming that we've done all the due diligence and we prioritize this and this is what we want to build. So as a product manager, you have two options. You can go talk to the engineering manager and tell him, hey, I just want to add the ability to add a comment on blog post. And the engineering manager takes it over. So in this option, this is where your work ends and you leave it up to the engineering team. So two things might happen. The engineering team might have this amazing superpower. They might be able to read your mind and know exactly how you want the feature to work. And that's what happens most of the time. No, it doesn't. That never happens. What really happens is the team will start building something, but there will be tons of questions on how things should work. You'll be able to answer some of them, others you probably hadn't thought about, which is all right. For example, should people be able to reply to other people's comments, Can anybody comment or only login users can comment? What should be the word limit on the comment? Now, what seemed like an easy 2-day job is slowly started to become a multi-week project with more things to figure out. In the end, what will happen is the feature will not be released because there will be too many unanswered questions. Nobody will really know what to do, and it will keep getting delayed, and everybody will just be very unhappy. Now there's an option too, the right way to do it. So as a product manager, you take out the time and put in the effort to list down exactly how this feature that the marketing team wants needs to behave. You define what the first iteration of it should look like. You break down the requirements into smaller parts. You take out time to think of all the edge cases. You identify and list out things that are out of scope for this project. Now, if you go with this option, what will result in is there will be less questions during the development. Feature will be ready on time and it will work exactly the way you want it to behave. Well, so I guess everybody would choose option 2, right? It seems like the better option. So now how would you go about working through an option 2? So let's look at a framework of epics, user stories and tasks, which is a great way of translating business requirement into product features. It has a lot of advantages. Number 1, smaller stories are easier for the engineering team to understand and work on. They're also easier to track and give you a more accurate understanding of the progress of the project. It also gives you more flexibility of releasing the feature in smaller iterations, and you can get feedback sooner from users, which is great. You can also gauge the success or failure of the project through the feedback. Some questions come to mind. How small should the user story be? Is there a method to the madness? So let's look at each of the elements. On the top, you will have your feature or the problem you're trying to solve. Now that feature or problem can be broken down into smaller epics. Under every epic will be multiple user stories, and under user stories there will be smaller tasks. Now let's look at each of them. What is an epic? So an epic is a logical collection or grouping of user stories that fit together. A project can have many epics and each epic can have many user stories. Now there's some common questions that come up during the discussion of epics. The first one is, does it make sense to have an epic for every release? Absolutely no. Sometimes you might have a really small user story that you want to release. But if you have a set of user stories that relate to some common problem you're trying to solve, then you can actually group them under an epic. But absolutely no, you don't need to have an epic for every release. You're not trying to create extra work or processes when it's not required. Do you have to release all the user stories in an epic together? There is no hard and fast rule for that one. It depends on what makes it easier for the team to manage and track the product. You can either have multiple release versions in one epic or have one epic for each release for user stories. The end goal is to make the team's life easier when tracking these projects. If it's not doing that, then you need to find a better way of working. Let's talk about user stories now. A user story defines an interaction that the user has with the product, and it can be independently tested. A very common format that you'll see is, as a user, I want to, and then you explain what the end goal is for the user. The user in this case can be a customer or a prospect who is using a feature, or it can be internal stakeholders if you're trying to build something for your internal teams. In this case, the marketing team. So this statement is followed by the acceptance criteria, which is a series of bullet points which form the boundaries around which the solution needs to work. It would be something like the solution should be able to do X, Y, but the solution shouldn't do Z. We're going to talk in detail about how to actually write a user story in a separate video later on. The next part of breaking it down is you have a user story. Now you have to break it down into smaller tasks. So the next thing we want to talk about is tasks. Over the years, I have heard a lot of different definitions around tasks. For me, tasks is a set of things that the development team needs to do in order to complete a feature. Most stories would generally be further broken down into tasks, but you don't necessarily need a user story to complete a task, because a task might be building APIs or doing some backend work or doing some other things that need to be done in order to release that user story. Now, anybody in the team can create a task. In larger team, it's better to define type of task. It makes reporting easier. In most cases, the development team will break down user stories into smaller tasks, like we said. So I hope you got the gist of what we're trying to do with the feature, right? You're just breaking it down into smaller chunks so that it can be consumed by the team. Now, this format is used globally by a lot of companies, but there are obviously some challenges with it as well, because no format or framework is perfect. You run into issues at some point. Some of them that I have personally run into are, sometimes I've had the engineering team come and tell me, hey, the user story is not broken up enough. You break it down further, and you learn as you go down the line. Sometimes I've been told, hey, you have broken it down way too much. So you have to try and find that balance. I've also had teams that have actually converted development tasks into user stories, which is a big no-no. Actually should not happen. And user stories have been converted into development tasks. There is also a question when you're trying to estimate, should we estimate a user story or a task? And then who owns what? Like, does the product manager own the epic and user stories, and the dev team owns the task? So these are some of the things that I actually don't have answers for. The only answer I have is depends. It depends on the team, So you have to talk to your team because before implementing this, because eventually the goal is to make everyone's life a tad bit easier. But if it's not doing that, is causing more friction in the team, then it's not doing its job. So you have to balance the need for the framework versus what works best for the team. You also need to make sure that you educate the team on how you're actually breaking down the user stories and grouping them. Take their feedback and iterate and until you found the right balance. Go ahead, try it out, see if it works for you. Let us know if you have any questions for us. And on your way out, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much.